Yeah, I mean, I think Framework 1, the whole idea was that it's supposed to be simple, one file. Looking for an animal. Wow. I don't know, like a bird, probably. Something that just flies, just does its thing. Fusebox, I hesitate to say this, but my first image was a dinosaur, and we should never use that in the ColdFusion community. But unfortunately,
welcome back to the show. I'm here with David Belanger and Tom King, and we're going to be talking about CFWheels, a ColdFusion framework for the rest of us. And we'll look at what CFWheels is and what's coming up in the new release of CFWheels, and some really cool things you can do with RESTful routing and the ORM that's built into it, and lots of other cool stuff. So welcome, Tom and David. And in case you don't know them, they're two of the four wheels on the CFWheels team. I guess you could call it a CFWheels bus, so to speak. And Tom has been doing ColdFusion since 2001, and he joined CFWheels version 1 quite a while ago. And he even spoke on it at CF Camp a few years back, so 3 years ago now. So, and then David, he is our Canadian ColdFusion connection, and currently living in Argentina. So he's very international. And he's been doing ColdFusion since version 4.5, which is a long while ago. Mm-hmm. So, and helps get ColdFusion more exciting in Argentina and Latin America. So, welcome, David and Tom.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So I guess the elephant in the room is, for those people who haven't used CFWheels, and I know from our ColdFusion developer survey, the State of the Union survey, not everyone uses CFWheels. There may be people wondering what is CFWheels. Obviously, it has something to do with ColdFusion, but what is it?
Who wants to start?
You can just go ahead.
Okay. Well, in short, it's an MVC-based framework, and it was inspired somewhat by Ruby on Rails. And it's got over 10 years worth of development in it. And the idea was to have a really accessible framework where we got inspired by the Ruby on Rails concepts and translated them into CF. I think, David, you know a bit more about some of the sort of history side of it, don't you?
I do. Yeah, Rob Cameron in 2005 was a big Ruby fan, loved Ruby on Rails, and wanted to see if he can translate it to ColdFusion, and he did. And basically, he just kind of quickly created a framework. He started with the view and the controller, and then later in he added the model. And then he kind of realized that he wanted to go back to Ruby. So at that point, Per Jörner from Sweden took over the project, and he was joined by Chris Peters, and that was a very long period, a couple of years, where they really got the ball rolling on the project, got it out on GitHub, made it open source, really did a lot of contributions with a lot of other people. And I discovered it actually in 2014, and I discovered it as a result of I changed jobs, and the job I landed into said, we're a we're a CFWheels house, and here it is. I said, great, well, I guess I better learn about it. And luckily, Chris Peters had put a bunch of videos up online, and it was very easy to use, very easy to learn. And I say that having come from a Fusebox background, which was a great framework, not quite as easy to understand and use. So I was very, very happy with the way that CFWheels was organized.
I had a similar experience where I tried a couple of frameworks. I mean, I can't even remember which ones, but I got to the point where I just didn't, I had to walk away from it. And I ended up basically writing my own little mini frameworks, reinventing the wheel time and time and time again. And then I came across Chris Peters' screencasts, and it just, something clicked. And it was actually a really lovely thing, because I got to the point where I could, once I sort of got over the basics, I could start guessing what the function name should be in the framework, And sometimes it's just really nice when those things just, all click into place. So I had a very similar experience of just being able to drop right into it. And it's definitely one of the things we try and preserve today, is that sort of ease of access for someone who might never have even touched a framework.
Mm-hmm.
So how long did it take you to learn it, both of you? I'm just curious. Was it a day or a week or a month? Or?
I'm still learning it. Every time I open the core code up, I sort of have to train my way through it. But no, I mean, I had working apps within a couple of weeks, sort of thing. One of the things about it is it's very convention based. So if you don't want to put tons and tons of configuration in, you don't have to. And you can also, it sort of favors this hybrid development style. So when I say favors, it allows you to do sort of hybrid development. So you can take existing code, like a block of code, which works, and you can just sort of insert it into a view if you wanted to, just to make it work. And so it was very quick entry. So you can just go, right, well, I know this code works, let's pop it here and run it through Wheels, and as if by magic it sort of works. So that was really useful for me when I was trying to migrate legacy applications into Wheels.
Mm-hmm. Convention over configuration for me was the biggest seller, because everybody in the office at that point had a different way of doing things. And when I went into CFWheels and I opened these other projects that were using Wheels, I pretty much immediately understood what they were doing. Everything was organized in a way that was easy to read, easy to find. You just knew where things were happening or where they had to happen. Things that had to happen in the model, the view, or the controller. And while there's a lot of people out there that aren't big ORM fans, I am, because it's very streamlined. I mean, you're using objects. The objects are calling these methods. It's very clear what everything is doing. And some people say, well, I just can't do enough with it. I can't get detailed enough to what I want to do. Well, if you want to go ahead and put your queries in, you can. There's nothing stopping you. We have complex reports that need complex queries that sometimes aren't great for ORM. So we do it. There's nothing stopping you. We're not breaking convention or configuration by doing that. We're just doing what we need to do to get detailed reporting done. It's a great base to start from for any app, and that's why I loved it.
So you mentioned convention over configuration. Could you explain that a bit more, because that may not be something people are used to if they haven't done Ruby on Rails or CFWheels. So what does convention mean when you're actually coding?
Basically, it's knowing where to go because it's already set up for you. When I'm looking at, I'll do an example. If you're dropping into a new Wheels project and you set up a scaffolding, right off the bat, it's going to ask you, okay, what kind of objects are you going to be using? What are you dealing with? So we always use the books examples in ColdFusion, since I think the CF Web Application Kit books always talk about books or movies in this point. So you say, okay, I'm going to talk about movies. And right off the bat, it throws into the controller your edit function, so your CRUD, your create, your read, your update, your delete. And it kind of structures everything the way it's supposed to work. And before, you could call these directly by putting, here's your item that you're working on. Let's edit that. And it would have the word edit after it. And what we've done with 2.0, which was a great addition, and one of the things that I really focused on in the last couple of years, was we've made it RESTful. So now we can actually make an API, and if I want to edit something, instead of actually using the word edit, I can just do a patch. And instinctively, that verb, which is hidden from the user, the server knows that patch means we're about to edit something. And this is not, it's more secure because we're not actually telling the user what we're doing, we're just doing it. So everything is set up for you. You don't have to think about it. I just instinctively know now, again, this is the convention part, that if I want to do this, I'm going to use a put in version 2.0, or I'm going to use an edit in version 1.47 was the last one I think we had.
6-ish, yeah.
6, yeah. Close.
And so is the no configuration file? It's not one of those XML files like you get in some of the other frameworks? Or?
No, there's no XML at all actually in the configuration. So it's all, CFScript. we've got obviously a lot of framework specific variables which you can turn on and off or whatever, and so there are configuration files, and obviously we have multi-environment settings, so we'll have production, development, testing, etc. So there are configuration files, but they're not complex XML documents or anything.
So how does CFWheels differ from ColdBox or Framework One or FuseBox? You mentioned it's easier for beginners to get into. Is there any other? Because they're all basically can be used as MVC frameworks.
Oh, absolutely.
So why does it matter which one you pick?
That's a good question. I went into the box the first time last year, and I really got into ColdBox to find out what it was really all about. And I found a lot of things very, very similar to what we were doing. And that's because for an MVC, they're supposed to be similar. That's the whole idea, organizing your code in an MVC way so that everybody can find what they need. I just found that with Wheels, it was quite literally a copy-paste of the framework. And you could edit whatever you needed to edit directly there. You didn't need to know about, I'm going to use the PRC. So the PR and the PRC this is the memory space that ColdBox uses, and I can never remember what it stands for. But you have to kind of know about the memory space. I think that ColdBox was also big on closures, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a little more, you have to know a little bit about how that works and how to chain everything together to get that working. I think ColdBox is a great framework, and I think once you know it, you're flying with it. But I think there's a little bit more of a learning curve than there would be for a Wheels user.
I also think that some frameworks, like Framework One, is designed to sort of do its thing and just get out of your way. And we're not trying to do that. We're trying to actually impose order on chaos a little bit, maybe. So, and we're all trying to give you the tools as well, because we've got so many features in the framework, which we use all the time, like sort of things like form helpers and really quick ways of constructing really complex layouts, and down to really simple things just like string formatting. So we try and get all those core features in there so that you don't have to go onto cflib.org and go, oh, what was that? What was that string thing I used 6 years ago? We try and put the sensible stuff in there which people need.
So if you had to compare these four frameworks, ColdBox, Framework One, FuseBox, and CFWheels, to personalities or animals, what would you say each of them kind of roughly felt like to you?
Oof, there's a good question. I wasn't ready for that one.
Yeah, I wasn't ready for that one at all.
I don't really know, to be honest with you. I mean, I think Framework One, the whole idea was that it's supposed to be simple, one file. Looking for an animal. Wow. I don't know, like a bird, probably. Something that just flies, just does its thing. FuseBox, I hesitate to say this, but my first image was a dinosaur, and we should never use that in the ColdFusion community. But unfortunately, I loved FuseBox. I really did. It just fell out of support. It fell out of favor, and everybody just gave up on it very quickly. And sometimes with good reason. I mean, there are easier things out there. And I do like ColdBox. I find that it's got a great support team behind it. The Ortus guys are fantastic. I think they do a lot for our community with all of their tools. And I know we're gonna talk about in the show too. It's just for me, Command Box alone has been a game changer in the last couple of years. It's really helped me a lot to do my work.
Yeah, I second that. The Ortus guys with Command Box. So I mean, I'm looking at deploying an app at the moment on Docker using Command Box. So CFWheels app on a back end in a Docker image into Fargate, and that just blows my mind a bit, really, because like a few years ago that would have been a horrible thing to have to actually do. You'd have to set up EC2 instances and all sorts. So the modern CF tooling those guys are coming up with, I'm massive fan of, and we've actually got a CFWheels CLI which we use for things like command line unit testing. So we're actively engaging with those tools, and it's really nice to know that the Autos guys are there, because you can ask them a question at any time, and so, they're always answering questions. I don't know how they get anything done.
I think they're a hive mind connected by Slack. I'm saying that in a good way.
Tom King, by the way, whenever you ask a question on CFWheels, before I've even finished reading the question, Tom has already started answering it.
Oh. So I think we got two animals in there. Framework 1 as a lightweight bird, and Fusebox as a somewhat ancient dinosaur that got neglected. But I didn't hear what the animal for ColdBox or CFWheels was.
Man, it's really hard to think of an animal for these things. Lisa's going to love this, but I'm thinking ColdBox more along the lines of a tiger, because they are getting more aggressive with it. They are publicizing it a lot. They're doing the conferences. They're really putting the word out there that this is an animal that can really get in there and do a lot of work for you, and really dig in. That's my best tiger impression I can give you. For CFWheels, I like it. I'm going to call it a horse, because it's useful, it's practical. You put it in, you instinctively know what you're going to do with a horse. You're going to ride it. You just look at the horse, say, okay, I know how this works. I get on, I've seen other people do it. Let's go. There's not a lot of thinking involved when it comes to that particular animal. I guess that's my answer. Yes.
Great answers, So I've got some, I realized we ought to take a step back, because we kind of made an assumption that everyone in ColdFusion land is using a framework. And I know from surveying developers that's not actually true. There's people out there who either don't use a framework at all. Maybe they tried one out like you did, Tom, and didn't like it and haven't touched one since. Or maybe they've got a homegrown framework. And, so let's start off with the first one. Why should you use a framework at all?
It's actually, in our documentation, it's one of the first pages, and we actually ask that exact question.
Yep.
And I mean, I think the answer is fairly obvious, in so much that you don't have to use a framework at all. Of course not. I mean, a 5-page static-ish website, yeah, you could put it behind wheels. Of course you could, but you don't need to. What I like about using a framework, though, is if I'm starting a project and I'm not quite sure where it's going to end up, I like having that flexibility of being able to go, okay, I'm going to have to turn this into, something with a full RESTful API on the back end. And instead of having to sort of redo the entire project, I can just carry on my merry little way. And just, I know that support structure's there if I need it.
Yep. And
what about? Oh, go ahead, David.
No, sorry. If I was to add to that, I would say too that whenever we're working with legacy apps, we can't just assume that the developers in our shop are going to be there forever. They aren't. There's a lot of jobs changing, and every time I come into a new code base, just finding things wastes a lot of time. So a framework it forces an organization, and for me, that's the biggest. Even if you're a one-app shop, it doesn't mean you're going to be a one-developer shop. So the next guy that comes in, or the next girl that comes in, who starts working on this app, it saves so much time to know where everything is and to be able to fix things. That, for me, is the biggest selling point of a framework. That's why I think everybody should be using a framework. Doesn't matter which one. We'd prefer Wheels, of course, but, you should
I like the fact as well that when I come back to code, even just a few months later, I know where the stuff is.
Yeah.
Because I've got Wheels apps now, which are, donkey's years old. And, occasionally you have to, dig back into them and go, oh, right, okay, yeah. But, you just know exactly where you are straight away, which is lovely.
That must have been Wheels version 1 if it was donkeys instead of horses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe it's Wheels 1.4 or 1.3. They were good, but they perhaps less stallion-like than Wheels 2.
So what about people who are using a homegrown framework? Because there's a lot of developers who just built their own framework, and they're like, well, why should I change to one of these other frameworks?
Well, changes. Sorry, David, you go for it.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking it's a very similar thing. I mean, if you ever have to pass your code on or open source something, to have something where I, as a developer, I mean, if I open source something, I want people to contribute to it, and by having a framework with at least some conventions and documentation, I'm lowering the barrier of entry in open source, and I think that's a good thing.
And for me, I've been in a situation in our office especially where we did have homegrown frameworks, not in this particular job, but a couple of previous ones. And the thing about an open source framework is there's lots of people in the community who are finding small bugs and fixing them. And you don't always have the manpower in your shop to constantly be looking at your own code to find these little bugs. So it comes back to the more eyes you have on a project, even though your particular project might not be open source, the framework is. And that's a great thing.
And I think also, the fact that it is a framework, people, it gets documented. I was going to say better, but documented at all. I mean, a lot of homegrown frameworks I've seen, there isn't any documentation.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got this whole set of documentation, and so do the other frameworks.
We're quite proud of our documentation, actually. I mean, it's not like I've written it all. I mean, it's cumulative over the years, but there's a central API reference, so you can very quickly find the function in the framework that you might need to deal with, and that's not just online at api.cfwheels.org. We also distribute that with the framework, and when you're in development mode, you can just browse it. So you can pull it up at any point. So even if you're offline, you've still got all the documentation framework there. And we use JavaDoc to parse it in the source code and pull out all the arguments and all that sort of stuff. And that's quite nice as well. So it means that people can start changing that core documentation via GitHub as well, obviously. But it also has a sort of secondary function. So once we've done that whole JavaDoc parsing thing, we now let you, when you write your code in the framework, use the same syntax and categorization features, and it will pull in and sort of merge with the core framework code. So if I passed on a Wheels 2.0 app, which had been decently documented in the code in JavaDoc, it would be all there alongside the core CFWheels documentation and the API reference, which is quite a nice little sort of package. So that was just designed to sort of save time so that you could document your own application's functions really, really quickly.
So let's move on to some of the exciting features in CFWheels. I know RESTful routing is one that's currently in CFWheels 2.0. What exactly does that mean? I mean, I know what REST is. That's a way of sending data between two different apps or APIs. But you've got some routing in there as well?
Yeah. I use that a lot. Since version 2.0, I was actually a very early adopter of 2.0 because of the RESTful routing. We created an API for iPad apps. And one of the things I like about it is you have complete and total control over how your external apps communicate with your API. You control everything. You control the deletes, the edits, the puts, what we call, the gets or the posts. And you can really tailor the experience. You can also tailor what you give back to your endpoints. In my case, the iPads, in error codes, in JSON strings, in data. It's having complete control over all the security and all of the endpoints of your app because we have a very handy routing table that lets you do that.
And how would that help you in creating your app?
Well, we've always had the convention over configuration, so we're still staying with URLs that are very intuitive. So when you talk about URL, you're going to talk about the object you're working on, usually, and the ID, possibly, of what you're working on. And then instead of any other words, that's when you use those hidden verbs with the RESTful routing. And you can turn them on or off. So there are many endpoints that are just information only. So they're pure gets, and we don't need anything else. And certain endpoints you would never give to, in my case, an iPad. You would never give delete, for example. So you make sure that all of that is turned off for certain access points. But you can also create special routes, and that's what I have, a hybrid application where your API handles the iPad stuff, but your administrator handles everything else. And you can also control those endpoints within your app. So you can give your administrators who are logged on the web certain features that are not available to anybody else. You have complete control of that.
We often actually refer to it as resource-based routing. So, for instance, in our mapper, which is the function we call with all the chained requests, you could have something as simple as resources with the name of the resource. So it could be something like, I don't know, cats, right? And that by default meant you could send a get request to /cats, get all the cats, right? And then you could send a post request to /cat to create a cat. And again, it's part of that convention that all my controller methods are going to match up to this stuff. And I can do it with one sort of little shortcut, and I can open up all these access points, or I can then sort of, start tailoring it and restricting it. And so I could do something like say, hey, I've got a resource of cats, except the delete function. We don't ever delete a cat because I like cats.
So does this mean you can easily have your CFWheels app, expose all the model that it has as an API, so you can have a different front end, for example, if you're doing Angular or React or Vue as your front end?
Yeah, you could approach it several ways. I mean, you could either have your CFWheels app as a pure, JSON API, or you could have just one path, one of these paths, like /API. Well, not if you're on ACF, but /something v1 or whatever. That could be your JSON API as part of your larger website, maybe. So yeah, there's lots of. It's very flexible. I mean, we can pretty much get what we want from it.
And does this relate to microservices at all, or can you have the app split up into different pieces and they're all run separately and just talk to each other? Or
we tend not to go that approach. I mean, I think one of the, going back to the slight differences between the frameworks. I mean, ColdBox is, for instance, a really good example of a very modular framework. Wheels is much more of the slightly old school monolithic framework, but with plugins and with lots of features already there. So you could, of course, use CFWheels as one part of your microservices, infrastructure. Absolutely. I was reading the other day that you can run CFML on Lambda functions now. So I don't know, who knows? Maybe you could put CFWheels up on a Lambda function and have it as a microservice. But yeah, so I'm not quite sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, I think I'm with Tom on that one. I don't see it as a microservice-focused framework at all. I always tend to avoid the term monolithic because it's gotten such a bad name when really there's nothing wrong with having a back-end app that is in one place and self-contained. Because certain services are still run that way. We don't need microservices for absolutely everything on the planet. It's like one of those things that's the latest fad. Everybody's doing it. Well, I'm still with ColdFusion because they haven't changed that much, and they haven't been a fad for a very long time. I like that. I like the fact that I can rely on it.
It's a backwards compatible fad.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's going to be around for a while, and there's always people that know how to do it. And you can always find developers to help, and there's lots of resources out there still. So microservices, and I do like keeping up to date on a lot of these things, and I'm not saying that progress is bad, but I have seen in many, many projects a lot of money sometimes spent on the latest, greatest thing, and ColdFusion's old, let's just leave it, and yet ColdFusion is still running in that office. And what they did is half completed, or it hasn't been migrated, or they decided that it wasn't a good idea to migrate, and then there are these budgets and this endless funding of money that is going to new ideas when really what you had worked all the time. You just needed a fresh coat of paint sometimes, it's it's just crazy. I don't.
Right. So what can we do? Because I think that's a big problem in all programming development, that there's a lot of decisions that are not made for business or technical reasons, but they're made for fashion or political reasons, for want of a better name. Like, hey, here's this cool new technology, we've got to use it.
Mm.
We are seeing increasingly a separation of concerns in so much, the multiple front ends with a single sort of powerful API type backend. And I'm definitely going that route in my larger projects, the things which justify it, the stuff where I might have to scale the back, on AWS or whatever it might be. And then have, Vue.js on the front end, iPad app, iPhone app, whatever it might be. So I think that one's a keeper. I think we'll keep that one.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things you mentioned earlier was you love ORM in CFWheels. Is ORM totally integrated into that? And maybe we better explain to listeners what ORM is, just in case some of them haven't done that. So it's a way to access your data, right? Object, I forget what the R stands for.
Relational mapping.
Object relational mapping.
Yep.
So basically, instead of writing SQL statements, you make calls to the methods to do your data.
Exactly.
Is that how we works, or is it a different level?
No, it's the object-oriented approach. So you're going to talk about your objects. Like I said, the example would be books. In books, you're going to use keywords in the ORM, and the easiest one is find all, right? So from books, you go to books.findAll with these characteristics, and boom, it goes out and finds it. But every single, it doesn't matter if it's books or pencils or crayons, whatever, it's always going to be .findAll. That's when we talk about the convention that we're using to find these things. So you always know what it's going to do, because the terminology is the same. So if you wanted to find everything that actually does a search like find all, I can search in my code and suddenly have a big long list of all the finds I'm doing in the system. There's no surprise there.
So it makes maintenance easier.
It does. And it's not just maintenance too. I find it's very good for organization, because the other benefit of ORM, which is one of the things we hadn't touched on yet, was when you're going to do an update or a save, for example, we have triggers in there that will trigger before you do the save, or before you do the update, or after you do the save, or after you do the update, and you can run additional code. So you can actually chain things together that need to happen in a certain order. For example, if you delete something that is important because you're allowing an administrator to do so, but the rules say you need to notify certain people when that happens, well, you've got yourself an after delete function that can do that. And that's a great thing. Or if you need to update other data because something was deleted, you can also trigger that from the ORM procedures. I like that very much. It's very, very well organized.
Yeah, and on top of that, so you've got all those triggers, if you like. Yeah, there's also the validation part of it. So we've got a whole ton of validation functions already sort of built in. And I know Coldbox has got, I can't remember what it's called now, CBORM or something, their validation library as well. And similar, it's solving a similar problem, but with ours is just straight in there, so you always know it's going to be there, and that's really good. And you can obviously do all your own custom validations and things like that, and have model inheritance and all sorts of stuff.
The ORM, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tom, was one of the things that was in there from the beginning. It was never a plugin, but there were other things as we went along, like cold route and migrations that were being used by everyone, that we finally decided to integrate them a few years ago, and that's what came out with 2.0.
That's absolutely right. So cold route was the big one to try and migrate it, pull it into the core for CFWheels 2, and then there was a plugin called DB Migrate. So now, of course, in the core we've got proper database migrations, which is brilliant. The only thing is having to look after your own ORM system is you do have to. It's a bit of a poison chalice, because on one point it's brilliant because it works across all these engines. So we test across ACF, Lucy, Windows, Linux, So and the different database engines which we support, which is MySQL, MS SQL, and Postgres. So great because we know that those engines aren't going to break our stuff too much. So the actual ORM system has stayed the same for quite a long time, several years. The core of it, that is. And we haven't had to code around engine-specific changes in engine-specific ORMs. So it's as I say, it's a mixed, it's a slightly poisoned chalice because of course we've got to keep up to date. We've got to do all these tests, and we've got to make sure stuff works. And in fact, I mean, it was quite sad. We had to drop Oracle support last year, and that was because we just didn't have the people around using Oracle anymore. And I think that's increasingly common in open source stuff, where you just go, well, hang on, we've got this feature we need to support, but if there's no one there using it, you have to make quite a hard decision sometimes and drop some of these things. So unfortunately, yeah, we had to drop Oracle support, but as a consequence, we've put a lot more effort into everything else, the MySQL and MS SQL stuff, and I think we're in a better place now because of it. And we can always bring it back, if someone comes around and goes, yes, I will put my name to this and help you out.
So why don't we talk about some of the stuff that's built into CFWheels, because there seems to be quite a long list of things that I found on the website, database migrations and automatic documentation and all kinds of stuff. So
well, I think we mentioned the automatic documentation part of it already. The database migrations themselves, I don't think everyone uses database migrations. I think they should, because I think they're great. So what it is for us is a way of defining your database structure, but also your changes, so your structural changes through time, and it's all in CFScript. So it's database agnostic, and that's the most important part. So I can give my code with my database migrations, which I might have done on MySQL. I can, because it's defined in CFScript, I can give it to another developer or who's running it on, Postgres, and he can just run the migrations, and the framework then works out what to put where, which is brilliant for me because I don't have to then put all these database specific, breaking things in my code, and it makes everything much more portable. And it's also brilliant for when you've got stuff like Docker images and you want to just give someone your app, and you've defined, let's say you've got a Docker Compose file and you've got your local database running. Wheels can run the database migrations as soon as the application starts. So if you start it in production mode, you can say, yeah, always run the database migration. So you can pre-populate all your Docker databases and stuff like this. So it just makes everything a lot more portable and a lot easier to use. So I'm a big fan of them. It starts to get a bit complex when you get source control, and if you start merging branches where you might have a migration from one which relies on another and things like that. But let's not talk about that stuff of nightmares, that is.
The other integrations I think are really good is we have a test suite that's based on Rocket Unit that's integrated right in there, so you don't have to install another test suite. It's already there for you. You just hook into it and start using it. We do the CORS handling and the CSRF, so the protection against forgery is already in there as well, and that's fairly recent things that we put in.
I will say the CORS handling is not coming in until 2.1.
That's true. Yeah, it's on the way. That's true.
Yeah, but that's a really good example of where that feature was something I needed. So I wrote it, chucked it in. Now, the reason I could do it so quickly was because our routing system is already RESTfully based. So I could just look at what route an options request was coming in, and I could look at our routing table and go, well, okay, this URL only allows get and put. So I could then return in my CORS request a proper response. So for developers now, instead of having to go, which header do I set? They can literally set the application setting, turn on CORS, and the defaults which are in there are really quite sensitive for a standard JSON API.
Mm-hmm.
So what about, you mentioned version 2.1. What are you excited about in version 2.1 that's coming out?
I think most of it's bug fixes. But yeah, there's the cause handling. God, I didn't have a look at the list, but yeah, there's a lot of just small little tweaks which I think will improve the quality of our developers' lives.
The performance on the plugins was a big one too. Just kind of, we wanted to get it going a little faster on startup. And the 2.0 was a major release as well. And then big kudos to Tom and the rest of the team who did a lot of work on that. Everything that was in tag-based before was converted over to more modern script. So now the entire code base is in script. And that makes it easier to manage. It makes it easier to work with, much easier to read. That was a big job on the 2.0 release.
And do you have a release date for that, or
2.1? Don't hold me on it.
Well, we are 65% complete, so we're getting there.
Okay.
All right.
We don't have a date yet, no.
Yeah. Is there anything else in CFWheels you want to share with the audience?
I do. One of the ones I use all the time, form helpers. Tom mentioned it, but really the form helpers, I'm using that probably over 50% of the time. It's something as simple as start a form tag, couple of input tags, couple of select tags, end the form tag. And when you use those keywords, you're giving the system the power to validate what goes into those fields, the power to show errors on what goes into those fields. So if you actually, if you do the validation on the server and something doesn't pass, it will kick it back to the form and it will show you exactly the place, and you can customize your errors that are returned. And that's also when the validation comes really handy, because you can really give some detailed information to the user of what did you do wrong and how can you make this better. And I use that a lot.
I also use those from a really easy way to manage user interface, the user interface part of most websites, because you're sort of abstracting away your form to behind wheels. If you need to do things like just casually change what CSS class comes up on on an input or a type of input, you can just change it in one place and it propagates. It's then everywhere. So I form helpers were a big help to me when I started using CFWheels.
Yep.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier that the CFWheels community is small but friendly. How would people connect with the community? Where would you find CFWheel folks?
Well, we've got the main thing is probably we've got a Google mailing list, and we obviously try our best to answer ASAP any queries on there. But we've got CFWheels room on the CFML Slack channel, and you normally get a pretty quick response from that, because it pings my phone and annoys the hell out of me. So yeah. What else we got? We've got a blog. Those tend to be more sort of informational releases, so sort of when the next versions come out or whatever. And then of course we've got our GitHub issue where if you've got any problems, you can put something down there.
Cool.
And there's Twitter and YouTube as well, but yeah.
So it's great that you're coming on the CF Live podcast and sharing about this, but I have to be honest, I really don't see CFWheels at a lot of conferences for ColdFusion. Is that something that you're looking at changing, or?
I think, David, you're going to speak at something soon, aren't you?
I am. Well, I'm going to be at Into the Box. I'm not actually speaking about CFWheels, but I will be speaking. The thing about CFWheels is, like I said, it's a smaller framework and it's a smaller community, so we don't have our own events. I know that, and I want to mention just a few names too from the history that I've learned and how I learned as well. Mike Hankey at one point was a big, we almost called him an evangelist of CFWheels. He put out a lot of documentation, a lot of blogs, and he was at a lot of presentations. And really, we're getting a lot of users from word of mouth. People that say this is really easy to use, it's been supported, it's being supported, and it's still active, which a lot of frameworks are fading. And there's a lot of new blood. I'm new blood, very new blood in this team. I started last year. You're not going to see me very high on the contribution list. I just started. But if you look at the contributors list on the GitHub, there's thousands and thousands of commits by certain people, and they're excellent commits. So all these years, the project has been maintained, especially now, currently, Tom puts a lot of effort into this project. He's organized quite a bit. And he asked me to go on last year, and this is my first attempt at being a big part of an open source project. I knew there was a time commitment. I didn't know it would be as big. And I still don't put in a fraction of the time that Tom does, and I need to do more of that. But I think it's good, too, to get the word out there that if you want to be part of something, sometimes it's good to start with a small project because you do have more of a say, and you are using it. I like contributing to the things that I use, and I use this every day.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like you're doing wonderful work. It just would, I'm just thinking what would it take to get the word out on CFWheels to more folks? So,
well, we probably be included in the book CF Alive. I don't know. Just saying.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion. I'm working on the second edition of that, so I'll make sure it's in there.
Excellent.
Maybe I can get a quote from you about CFWheels.
Oh, absolutely. The screencasts help a lot. The blogs help a lot. And this is in a non-personal way. I love conferences I do, but I can't always afford them, especially being in Argentina. I can tell you there's not a whole lot of ColdFusion stuff in Latin America. I know, Michael, I'm sure there's a question coming soon. I'll wait for it. But I've heard many a podcast, and I know what you're going to end off with, so I'm going to wait for that.
Yeah. What about you, Tom? Any thoughts on how we can spread the good word on CFWheels to more folks?
I mean, for me, part of it is actually engaging people who are already in the CFML world a bit more. I mean, I think as a community, we've probably got quite a lot of people. Well, we've got a lot more people than we know about. There's a lot of 9-to-5ers. It's a bit of a derogatory term, but people who are using CFML generally in their jobs who don't necessarily take the time to engage outside of that sort of little bubble, and it'd be really nice to sort of try and break through on that a bit.
All right, so let's move to the final questions in the podcast. First one is why you're proud to use ColdFusion.
Because it works, and it's always worked, and it will continue to work. Tom's thinking.
I think it's your turn.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah, you answered. I was waiting for some extra conclusion from you, David.
No, it was one of those Churchillian statements, We will fight them on the ColdFusion beaches and in the landing fields, and it'll always be working.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great quote. I've got to write that one down.
I mean, I echo David's thoughts. It's always worked for me, but for me, it's always been really quick to do what I want to do. And now I've got more modern tooling with the command box stuff and CFWheels, which of course I love. I feel like I can take on any project really, which is really, really cool.
Absolutely.
All right. So the other question I always ask folks is, ColdFusion sometimes has a bit of a bad rap as possibly dying or legacy. And certainly in our State of the Union survey, that's often the top concern people have. But my question is, what would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year?
All right, I was ready for this one. So I've got a couple of points on this one. More immediate for me, and a lot of people don't even think about this, but I would say start off donating to Lucy. I'm not going to lie to you. In our shop, we don't use Lucy. I use it personally, but I don't use it at work. We do use ACF at work. But in Latin America, we shied away from ACF many years ago because it was expensive, and Latin America in general couldn't afford it. So Lucy was a very welcome addition to the ColdFusion world because it actually, for me, it was the PHP competition. that we could instantly talk about and say, if you want to use ColdFusion, you can. You don't have to pay big prices for a server. We can get you a server and get you going. And that's a big selling feature, again, at least in Latin America. The other things that we're trying to do is to hold more ColdFusion information sessions, especially for people that are not developers. Because you're right. When someone Googles ColdFusion, it's like, these people are talking about a language I've never heard of. Let's find out what ColdFusion is about. And it's like, ooh, what's this online? You know, these blog posts. And I don't know why that one ColdFusion is dead keeps showing up on Google. If I could figure out a way to kill it, I would. But that's our biggest problem. And the other thing we do is propose ColdFusion in every single proposal we put out. And we talk about it right there in the proposal, that this is something that's worked forever. It works, and it will work for your project. And we have some names to back it up, which I like. And this is all immediate. When we're talking long-term, I'm big on education. I know Adobe talked about it a lot, about the curriculum and the college and the universities. I think it needs to go beyond that. I think as developers, we need to personally talk to the people teaching the classes. Because while it's good to have a curriculum out there available, unless the person teaching knows about it, it's no good. So we either need to teach the classes ourselves, which I've done, or get the teacher to actually adopt it in their curriculum.
That sounds great. And I'll just add another point onto the Lucy, because right now Lucy is much better for cloud support on the licensing front. I mean, technically Adobe ColdFusion is fine in the cloud, but their licensing, to be honest, is not so great.
No.
So,
it's a little pricey.
It's clunky. It's not just pricey, it's kind of hard to understand and doesn't, you know, I think they just tweaked their licensing to make it more friendly. But like in the cloud, when you're using Docker instances, you might have something that pops up for an hour, you know, a virtual server that pops up for an hour and then goes away. Mm-hmm. And they don't really allow for that kind of licensing on a per hour basis.
Well, the first time I saw that was in AWS when they actually announced it years ago. And I thought it was a good idea. And then we saw the implementation.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a little bit expensive.
Yeah, it's kind of expensive. So I think that's something that hopefully Adobe's listening to. I've certainly nudged them several times that, hey, your cloud licensing needs to be better. So,
yep.
Anyway, let's move to Tom. What would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year, Tom?
I don't think I've got quite as good an answer as David, but I would bang on again about the open source stuff. I think one of the things we could do as a community is just open source more stuff, apps, things which solve people's problems. A few years ago, I open sourced a sort of room booking system. You know, real simple, badly written. Don't go and look at the code. I'm not going to tell you what the URL is. But the product is out there. People use it, and they then come across CFWheels, and then for us, you know, that was good. And people come across, you know, start installing Lucy and ACF on their servers to run these applications. And I've now got a whole bunch of clients who are just running this thing and use me as support. And now they have, you know, CFML in their stack, if you like. It's part of their solution. And I think the more of those sort of things that we can get out there, the better.
So this is like your secret route to worldwide domination by CFWheels and ColdFusion.
Yeah, just release everything for free. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned you're speaking at Into the Box, David. What are you looking forward to at this year's Into the Box?
Oh, I loved it last year. I loved seeing everybody in the community. You see a lot of names repeated in our community because we are a small community in the CF world. But the Ortus guys, like I said, they are so dedicated and so passionate and so enthusiastic about presenting ColdFusion and funny. Like I really enjoy a lot of these talks. Brad Wood I find to be one of the funniest presenters I've ever seen. Very witty, live demonstrations with I still don't have the courage to do, you know, coding out there in front of everybody, and he makes it work great. I'm going to talk to Pete this year. I want to talk a little bit about his migrations and what he's doing with ORM on the ColdBox side. Not so much to steal, just to know what's out there, what's new, what's new and exciting. And to compare notes, because I think that's how you learn, just by comparing notes with other people who are doing it a different way.
I will say we're also shameless. I mean, if we see a good idea, we will steal it. Absolutely.
Yep.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you there, and maybe at CF Summit in Las Vegas if you go to that. So.
Well, I'll be back in Argentina by then, but I know you guys are going to have fun if you go.
Oh yeah, it's a great event. So just to wrap up, if people want to find CFWheels or Tom or David online, what are the best ways to do that?
Definitely start at the website. So just cfwheels.org. All the links for everything you'll need are on that front page. So we've got our blog, GitHub repository, Slack, everything's on there. There's also the CF on Wheels Twitter channel. I've got a slightly odd username, which is at NeoKoenig, which is spelled NeoKoenig, I think. So you can catch me up on Twitter there, or I've got a website at www.oxalto.co.uk.
Yeah, and my Twitter handle is BellaTechDave. And the company I work for full time is Intoria.com.
Fabulous. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today and sharing your enthusiasm for ColdFusion and CFWheels.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Michaela.